Good to have you join us again. Welcome. Today, we confront an unfolding human catastrophe in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, a crisis of sexual violence that has not only intensified with renewed fighting, but has become intertwined with a collapse in humanitarian support when survivors need it most. Conflict-related sexual violence in Eastern Congo is escalating. Armed groups and even military forces are using rape and other sexual violence as weapons of war against provinces like North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. Survivors of these horrific crimes face a climate of impunity with few avenues for justice or protection. Now, what makes this crisis even more devastating is the dramatic reduction in support services caused by international aid cuts, especially from the United States, which until recently was the primary donor for post-rape care and essential health services. Clinics are closing. Post-exposure prophylaxis, that's PEP kits, vital to prevent HIV after rape, have disappeared from shelves, and fewer than 1 in 4 facilities now has life-saving supplies. Women and girls are left to walk for hours or longer to reach clinics that can no longer offer meaningful care. Meanwhile, displaced families fleeing violence are exposed to even greater risk in refugee settings like Burundi. Reported cases of sexual abuse, even among children, have tripled. This is not just a humanitarian emergency. It is a moral and public health crisis where violence is rising at the very moment that the lifelines of care and protection are being severed. Not sure where to begin with unraveling a way forward, but as always, one slot will make an effort in the next 30 minutes. We've invited Nixon Katembo, analyst, Great Lakes and East Africa, Shaloom Peace National Coordinator, MenEngage DRC, and Florence Boloko, Independent Consultant in Gender and Conflict Resolution. Thank you all for being here. I don't think we have Nixon yet, but I believe we have Shaloom. Shaloom, if you can hear me, can you acknowledge, please? Is your device muted? Because I cannot hear you over here.
I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. I can hear you now. Perhaps it was just a little glitch. Thank you for sparing the time to talk to us on such a sensitive subject. The recent reporting, I'm sure you saw the report yourself, shows sexual violence in Eastern DRC has increased significantly, and then you pair that with renewed fighting. What do you attribute this to? Is it just the fighting? Are the aids caught the primary driver of this escalation, or there is more? Okay, I don't know if you got the opening. I did say there is a report that there is an increase, a significant increase in sexual violence in the Eastern DRC. And this is coming with the renewed fighting that we're seeing. Some say the fighting might be the cause for the escalation, but there are others who argue against this. So, but what do you, as someone who is in the front line, attribute this escalation to sexual violence? And would you say that has to do primarily with the aid cuts from the U.S.?
So the escalation of all those things is about, yeah, sure, it's linked to the fight here in DRC, especially in the eastern part of DRC. And we see that women in the eastern part of Congo, they are really afraid and they are living in a constant fear. They are not even able to do simple tasks like fetching water, collecting wood, or framing become a daily risk. Women and girls are...
Okay, I think we've lost connection with Shaloom. I'm hoping that we can get Nixon and Florence to joining us well. Nixon, let me just try that. Nixon, if you can hear me, good evening and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, and to my colleague Florence back in the DRC.
Okay, great. So I was talking to Shaloom. I don't know, Shaloom, have you finished your thoughts? Because I think we kind of lost you for a bit there. Okay, I'll just bring Nixon in and just get a sense of your understanding of the sexual violence that is being perpetrated against women and girls in this area. What do you think the world is missing from what's going on?
I think the world has missed a great opportunity to nip the bud in what is going on in Eastern DRC since 1996, because numerous reports that have been documented by the United Nations group of experts, various NGOs in the area, both local and international, including Amnesty International, Save the Children, International Red Cross, both have documented serious human rights violations, including sexual violence being used as a weapon of war. And I think this is not surprising, given the fact that what is going on in the DRC is still continue unabated, because there is a lack of accountability on those who perpetrate the violence against civilians, particularly women and children in this case. So the continued violence cannot only be attributed perhaps to what you alluded to in your introduction, that because of the aid cut by the USAID and the Trump administration. I think it's far beyond that. Rape as being used as a weapon of war has been part and parcel of the conflict in Eastern DRC, and there has never been any form of accountability to that effect. And as you see it continuing unabated, we saw, for example, the Panzi Hospital in Bukavu being established on the backdrop of what was going on, the conflict in the DRC, to the extent that Nobel laureate Dr. Denis Mukwege receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for what he has done in the conflict, and to the even being nicknamed as the women doctor. In other words, operating on women who have been sexually violated during the conflict in DRC. So this is not a new thing happening here. It's only the magnitude to which it's happening now currently, because there is no observations that whatsoever what's going on. You would recall that rebel health controlled by the M23. There is no lack of accountability. Right groups are not allowed to operate freely. NGOs are constrained in their operations, and that's why you see a spike in these violence that are happening against women and children in Eastern DRC.
All right, I wanted to reference back to your comment about the U.S. The reason they come up at this time is, correct me if I'm wrong, they are the primary donor in post-rape care and some essential services, particularly for women, and in funding some of these safe spaces where women can go to get some sort of care. And these places are closing down. And this report is saying that this is impacting whatever is being done to help women get away. We know that violence is on there. I mean, it is heartbreaking in its intensity, but these are women, and there are long-term implications here.
Indeed, there are long-term implications, and perhaps the closure of those different organizations and clinics helping women happen in a context in which there is a lack of accountability. There is a lack of follow-up on what and bring to book those who are perpetrating these crimes. And the issue of closure of these centers helping women, I think they have to be looked in the context in which they are happening. And hence I'm focusing more on how the perpetration have been allowed to continue instead of treating the symptoms or rather treat the reason, the root causes of that. Because if the conflict is ended, if there is a proper accountability, and those who are violating human rights and violating, committing this heinous crime against women and children are brought to book, we wouldn't be talking about clinics treating women or closure of these clinics. In other words, the treatment
Nixon,
of the symptom rather than...
All right, Nixon, I will come back to you because I'm curious as to how we can engender accountability in the middle of a war. Whether we like it or not, there is conflict going on and people are paying the price. So the reality is there is care that needs to be given, and it is falling short of a given standard, however you look at it, even in a humanitarian situation. But let's try and see if we can bring Florence in to this conversation. Florence, if you can hear me, can you just acknowledge, let me know you can, before I go ahead with the question. Okay, I don't think we have Florence still, but Shaloom, if you can hear me, can you acknowledge? Okay, I think network is just playing games with us. So Nixon, I'll just stay with you, and just what I have reiterated now, there is a conflict, and we're talking about sexual violence. You say if there is no accountability, strong actions and, productive actions might not really come off. So my question would be, how do we engender accountability in the middle of war in terms of sexual violence that's being perpetrated?
I think one of the critical aspects here to look at issues of accountability, one and first and foremost, is to make sure that the war is stopped. And that can be stopped by bringing together all the Congolese, including armed groups, and put forward a proposal for peace. And therefore, looking at who has committed what in the process, who were the commanders. The investigation have to go far as finding out who are the perpetrators in this case. And therefore, once you establish those facts, then you start building a trust mechanism between the victims and the system within which accountability is going to happen, so that the victim can be able to tell their story openly without fear of favor or without a fear of retribution. And it's only there that we can think of bringing those who perpetrated this heinous crime to justice. Unfortunately, the issues of the Congo has been talked about as if they are happening in a vacuum. We know for the fact that there have been several efforts and peace deals that are being discussed and talked or either signed. But the issues of the accountability, justice, justice for the victims, those who perpetrated these crimes, how far the investigation can go in trying to make sure that such are not repeated. I think we saw in the case of Sierra Leone, a special court being established for those who perpetrated the crime in Sierra Leone, including the trial of the likes of Charles Taylor and many others. As long as that is not done for the Congo, justice being served to the people of the Congo, I don't think that this crime is going to happen. And we'll be talking about crime happening in the midst of war rather than looking at how can we stop the war, how can we then hold those who committed the crime accountable, and therefore begin the process of healing and reconciliation and the justice for the people of the Congo.
Nixon, I really had to restrain myself because I wanted you to speak fully before I interjected. But I know you know that there are ongoing and no-going conversation efforts. You said it, peace efforts to end this war. This war has dragged on for God knows how long. But the reality and the heart of this conversation is how we can bring some sort of, why we work towards that solution, some sort of succor for these women who are victims of this war. I will come back to you. Hopefully the connection with Shaloom is a lot better now. Shaloom, when we started, I asked you about, the escalation of sexual violence women and girls are experiencing in DRC, and what is at the heart of this escalation.
Thank you. The current escalation of primary is due to all the fights between the government force and the rebels group. And this war has led to massive displacements, and that is the big issue. It's naturally linked to the AIDS, because the AIDS is not because of the violence, but the AIDS is supposed to bring some,
I really wish the network would let us have a clear conversation with Shaloom. Nixon, I will come to you, and I don't know how much of these you know, but I will still ask anyway, because, again, it's women, girls, and children. What do you know about those that are most affected, and why it seems the reporting is not getting the required action of bringing some palliative their way?
I think it goes back to what Charlotte has just said, that the escalation in the war, and to the benefit of the viewers, for example, I was in Goma last year. I went to a camp just outside. In 2023. Sorry. Just before the takeover of Goma by the M23. I went to a camp just outside Goma in Munigi and many other areas in Masisi, as well as in Ruchuru. You find many of these camps, there is no assistance whatsoever. The children's and women's are roaming around without any critical care to support their situation. The fighters, particularly armed groups, including the rebels themselves, are preying on these women. And therefore, what I'm saying and what I'm insisting, having experienced those on the field where the fighting was going on, it's important to focus on making sure that there is a return to peace. Hence, I'm insisting that this palliative care have to go hand in hand. As long as the war continues, there will be casualties. And unfortunately, casualties for this war comes in the form of rape. It comes in the form of indiscriminate killings by the rebels, and including government forces at some point when they are fleeing the battlefield. So if you understand the nexus between fighting and the current situation related to rape, including the palliative care that you're talking about in terms of coming to aid to these women who are suffering, then you will understand the need for really a stop of this war, engaging peace dialogue, and therefore establishing a mechanism to bring those perpetrators to book.
Nixon, we are in complete agreement when it comes to putting an end to this war. There is no question about it. We've had that conversation here severally. We've even talked about the U.S. brokered peace at some point. We don't even know the status of that. There's been a lot of politicking around it. We don't know the update, but are there any efforts that is genuine at the moment that you think gives a glimmer of hope towards an end to the conflict in the DRC? Or are we still just going to keep going about? If that is the case, what are we left with?
I think, unfortunately for the case of the DRC, is that there hasn't been a political will on the part of the belligerent parties, both on the part of the government of Kinshasa and the part of the rebels themselves, including the government of Rwanda. But what we see rather an implication of a larger kind of stations within the region, which include Burundi, which point to the fact that there might be a large-scale war that's coming up in the region if necessary steps are not taken. I'm happy to see that this morning, or rather yesterday, the government of Angola trying to announce new processes of an inter-Congolese dialogue that will bring together the opposition within Congo, both armed opposition and non-armed opposition, including the rebels themselves, to pave way for a new dialogue that now will talk in earnest on what is going on. Because as I have participated in this program before, with regard to the Washington Accord, I had my reservation because for me, it was just a business accord. It did not look at the interests of these women who are being raped, who are being displaced day and night, who are sleeping without food, who are left in dire conditions that no human can be subjected to.
Okay, let me come in here again, because the whole point is to look for a way out of this quagmire. You say the U.S. brokered deal is more of a business deal, but we have regional bodies. We have the AU. We have ECOWAS. We have IGAD rather. We have so many regional bodies that could come up and help with finding lasting peace to this conflict. But are they doing their job? Because if they were, we wouldn't be having the U.S. coming to help broker peace on our soil.
Exactly the point, just to pick up to what you just said, is the question of what I said, a political will on the part of the belligerent parties. Both the government of Kinshasa, the government of Rwanda, which is supporting the M23 rebels, there are mechanisms that can be done to push these parties to come together towards a lasting solutions. But there have to be a political will also on a part of these regional bodies without not necessarily looking at the various interests that are at play within the great broader context of the conflict in the DRC. And I think to this point, both the regional players such as Angola, Tanzania, South Africa, Uganda have to come to be brought to the fore to say, look, this war has been going on. Regardless of what happened in Eastern DRC, any war, whether it is by force of arms, whether it or otherwise, have to end through negotiations. And these various issues at play have to be discussed with open mind, with sincerity, that it deserves for the people of the DRC to get peace. Otherwise, that have not been seen on the part of the regional bodies that you have just, they just issue statements and without making a follow-up. Let me give you a clear example, for example, that happened in the region. You would recall that in Burundi, there was a protracted war due towards democratization from 1993 up until 1998 towards the early 2000s. But this is what Tanzania did through the advice of the late President Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. He went to Rwanda, he went to Burundi, and he convinced all other regional bodies to say that, look, Burundi is our neighbor. As long as Burundi continue fighting, we will bear the brand of receiving refugees and so on. What we're going to do, to impose sanctions on Burundi so that Jean-Pierre Buyoya, who was the president at the time, can come to the table and make sure that the war ends. And the negotiation started, and eventually,
Nixon,
prevailed in Burundi. That political will has not come out clearly on a part of these regional bodies and the regional players within the context of the world years.
We're engaging conversations like this in hopes that we can trigger thoughts and actions. But the reality is that like you rightly acknowledged, the political will to push these things don't seem to be there. So let's right back to your earlier submission on the constraints that NGOs, rights group face in trying to provide care and, post-violence care to these affected women, girls, children, just young people generally. Is there a way that these bodies can help fill the gap? The withdrawal of the U.S. funding has some, if not a lot in your estimation, some impact in this care. And that's at the heart of our conversation today. How can they fill this gap? Can they even? Do they have the funding to help?
Again, I will reiterate my position that if the war ends, if there is a peace brought to the DRC, there will be no need for displacement for the people.
Okay, I don't want to be ordinary and mundane at the moment, Nixon, but even in a war, people still need sustenance. Even in a war, there are certain rules that need to be maintained. Humanitarian coverage is part of the rules of war. There are rules to this war, and that rule is being violated right, left, and center. So I'm asking you, perhaps for a little light in this darkness for the people who are having challenges, is there a way that you think these rights group can push a little harder and help alleviate why we work towards peace?
I think one of the things that they can do, these right groups, is to advocate for the end of the war, to push government to say, look, we cannot continue treating raped women. We cannot continue treating malnourished children at the expense of the war continuing. Because as long as the war continues, we will have malnourished children, we will have raped children, as long as there is no accountability for the fighters and their commanders and those implicated in this heinous crime, this problem will continue. And therefore, it's my submission really, and I insist again, that these right groups, whatever gap they might feel, in as much as they bring sort of palliative care critical care to these people who are being attacked, who are being raped, the primary focus should be on ending the war.
On that, we both agree. But then again, is the heaviness that comes with knowing that people are truly in pains in these areas. Thank you very much, Nixon Katembo, for obliging us today and sharing your thoughts on the very, very sensitive subject. Thank you.